So hello and welcome to the final edition of 2022 of the Cinetopia radio show and podcast. I'm Amanda, co-founder of Cinetopia and hosting this show. And I'm here with two regulars. So Steph Brown. Steph, how are you today?
Yeah, I'm really good, Amanda. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to talk about the new releases. I think there's a lot of good stuff going on Netflix and Amazon just now, so it's always good to bring up those films, and especially when they're accessible to everyone just now as well. But yeah, I'm excited to be back and just looking forward to the stress of the holidays being over, and slightly excited for Christmas, but that's more more secondary.
We're also back with Simon. Simon, how are you doing?
Hi, yeah, good, thanks. Good to see you both again. Thanks for having me back. Yeah, I'm pretty chilled about Christmas at the moment. I feel like I got everything done to kind of avoid the postal strikes, so I'm in a good place. I'm just ready to, crack on, watch some films, enjoy these fine films available on streaming. Yeah.
Yes, and we did challenge ourselves to a Christmas thing, but I do think we might have to pick that back up because it seems like we didn't get through all the Christmas films we planned. But I know that's your go-to thing during Christmas as well, is to watch as many Christmas films as possible. And you checked out a Christmas films in Glasgow as well?
Yes. So we haven't watched as many bad Christmas films as usual this year, I think, but we've caught a few. We caught that one on Amazon with Asa Butterfield, Your Christmas or Mine, and that was just truly like a bad film, like not laughably bad, just bad. We did not enjoy it. But yes, we've also been to Christmas screenings in Glasgow. So we went to see Gremlins last night at the Brigade, which was a kind of semi-outdoor screening in that it was in a venue technically, but the venue didn't have any heating, so it was absolutely freezing. But a good showing for that, a good crowd, all enjoying Joe Dante's classic Gremlins and getting in the festive mood that way. I think they were showing Die Hard immediately afterwards, but we were too numb and too cold to continue.
Yeah, fair enough. And given I know I was thinking, oh, what a good idea outdoors, but given the weather in Scotland this time around, I'm sure it was freezing, and
absolutely freezing. Yeah. I'm sure if you wanted to, you could have screenings on Queen's Park Pond in the south side of Glasgow. It's completely frozen over.
Exactly.
But you would freeze to the pond, like.
Yes, it's been exceptionally cold. Winter, and I escaped about a week ago, so I'm speaking to you guys from Florida, and not going to rub that in. But we also and in Edinburgh did, speaking of Gremlins and Die Hard, we did some fundraising screenings for Save the Filmhouse campaigns. And they did pretty well. Very warm in there, actually. But those films were quite popular. So thanks to all that came out and supported those different campaigns. And we'll leave the conversation around the Filmhouse out of it because it's a holiday show. Stay as positive as possible. It's not been a very positive few weeks for what's going on in the Edinburgh landscape.
Heard a bit about some bids being rejected for the Filmhouse, but I'm not.
Yeah, it's not clear to many of us, so that's why we will await the news, which is a bit scary in the new year. Supposedly, whoever bought the space will be announced in some capacity in the new year, and it's not looking good. So let's go to good things, which we're largely focusing on films that you can see online currently in December, and various streaming platforms. Some of our favorites. We are reviewing 4 films. So on Netflix, we're reviewing 2 films, Roar Othag's Troll, It's a Norwegian film. It's doing really, really well on Netflix right now, internationally. Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, which is doing very well as well. On Mubi, Park Chan-wook's Decision to Leave, which I think won the Best Director at Cannes this year. So we'll be talking about that. That's on Mubi. And on Amazon Prime, Nikatu Jusu's Nanny. And those are the films for this December episode. All right, so the first film we're going to talk about is Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. And Simon, we know the story Pinocchio, but what makes this different? Tell us about this particular rendition of this tale.
Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio is a stop motion animated version of the Pinocchio story, directed by Guillermo del Toro and Mark Gustafsson. We know this story, but in short, it's set during it's in Italy during the rise of the fascists led by Mussolini. Geppetto is a carpenter who loses his son during a bombing raid by forces trying to suppress the fascist uprising. And Geppetto carves his own wooden boy to kind of replace his son. The blue fairy comes and imbues it with some degree of life, and Pinocchio goes and has all kinds of adventures with Sebastian J. Cricket, sort of standing in for Disney's Jiminy Cricket, and all kinds of adventures in the circus and with a performing monkey. It's a fun film. It's I think the main difference between this and other versions of Pinocchio is kind of Guillermo del Toro's creative sensibility, which you feel infused through the whole film. It's got very Del Toro kind of monster and demon designs, and the fact that it deals with the rise of fascism in Italy and the kind of suppression that people felt, the kind of oppressive atmosphere. It's interesting that it deals with all that while dealing with the ideas of death and life and what it means to be alive. It's I thought it was a really interesting version of the story.
Yeah, I agree. I really liked this as well. I think that once again we kind of see how great a storyteller Del Toro is.
Mm-hmm.
He kind of makes this genre bending political drama and fantasy, and it kind of breathes a whole new life into this fairy tale. And he can always kind of make something his own, and it's kind of a joy to watch. I think a lot of people will know that what more can be done with this fable. It's kind of a story that has essentially been told to death in media, but with Del Toro there's always kind of this another angle to explore, another message to drill through these different stories. And I think that, like Simon said, one thing that kind of Del Toro excels at is political commentary, that goes through his films, especially when he touches on fascism and kind of that division between this brutal sense of reality and this crutch of escapism that a lot of characters hold on to. And I think because this is an animated film as well, it kind of emphasizes that sense of unreality more. And it's almost the way that humanity is almost programmed to descend into these fractured ideologies. And that's kind of the biggest mystery of all. And we kind of saw that theme running through Nightmare Alley as well, that we talked about a little while ago. And it's kind of that whole message of, are we all monsters really? Is that all our true kind of regressive state? So I think that the kind of animated effects, the animated kind of style this film has really kind of transcends these messages quite simply, but really effectively, especially emotionally.
I also thought it was interesting that how much there was this carnival sort of aspect to this film, plus coming out of Nightmare Alley, which had such a, massive, obviously we talked a lot about its sort of harkening back to previous films like Freaks and stuff like that. And so that, like Del Toro always kind of goes back to this kind of like some pulp and also sort of, folklore of previous storytelling and films as a film lover. I thought it was really epic, actually, you know, and in a way that, you know, obviously it's hard to come off of doing something like Pinocchio that's been done so many times. And then actually, I've not seen enough of the ones recently, but I know there was quite a few in the last couple of years as well.
Yeah,
There
I
was,
feel like there's been like 3 this year alone.
yeah. and I think one before that, what was that, the other the Italian director did, that was like a live action like a couple years before. So a lot of competition here. But obviously it's Del Toro, and it was very effective. It was very elaborate. It was clearly, I didn't see that many making ofs, but you could tell the great deal of you know, production value that went into this film. And you know, and also the voices, you certainly, you know, knew of and or recognized the voices and sort of who played the various characters as well.
Yeah, I think that like it's cool because it is similar to obviously the same kind of motifs that we've seen through films like Nightmare Alley with Del Toro, and going back to Pan's Labyrinth as well, with this kind of commentary. But I think it's so cool that kind of Del Toro in a way always has this kind of really impactful message throughout all these films. You know, the kind of, we're always going to remember the ones who don't conform, when there's this kind of sense of kind of rigid unity in society. And I think that it's really interesting how we've kind of got these protagonists in this film like Geppetto that's really meant to be quite likable, and at the start he's not really at all. He's kind of torn between these kind of political and cultural divides, and he kind of believes he can mold Pinocchio into his own ideals of what, you know, a child should be, kind of based on his lost son, Carlos. And I think that it's kind of that kind of cinema that really resonates with you, because there's that kind of innocence from kind of these animated films at the core, with kind of that kind of emotional impact comes from. But then I think with this kind of climax at the end is kind of different from Del Toro in a way. There kind of almost seems to be kind of a sense of optimism here that we don't see a lot from him and with these kind of films.
Yeah, it's not at all slight in its handling of emotional issues for what is ostensibly a children's fable. You know, it's tackling like heady themes, not just the political themes like the anti-fascism, but it's talking about death and grief and what it means to love someone. It's really powerful stuff that's really stuck with me after watching it. And I did watch a making of, which came on Netflix immediately after it, like rolled over after the credits into this making of, and the animation work is just stunning. Del Toro took like 12 years or something planning this film out and trying to get it made, because I think he was partly waiting for stop motion technology and puppet technology to kind of catch up with his vision. And you know, Del Toro's name is in the title, but credit has to go to Mark Gustafson, who's kind of the animation director, the animation co-director, because the animation, it just looks incredible. I thought a lot of it must have been CG made to look like stop motion, but it really wasn't. A lot of it was practical puppet effects that just look incredible. And they built, you know, different sizes of Pinocchio for the different shots, different scales. You know, a huge Pinocchio for when he has to interact with the tiny cricket. It just looks incredible, and it's combined with kind of Del Toro's aesthetics in a really really interesting and beautiful way.
Yeah, I mean, I am very impressed that that is all stop motion. I could see that it was like a stop motion style, but it really, yeah, I wouldn't have even guessed that, you know, like obviously I'm thinking things like Wes Anderson's sort of, you know, very sort of classic way of, you know, or Wallace and Gromit kind of thing, but this feels really exceptional in terms of almost, yeah, like much more of a different kind of animation, I would have guessed, but that's interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in agreement with the animation. It looked fantastic, the whole film. I think that a lot of stop motion animation does have quite a lot of controversy behind it. People, you know, don't really think that, especially when we've got all these kind of effects of CGI, people kind of stay away from it. They don't think it looks great. But I think this just shows that, you know, there's few limitations with what you can do with stop motion if that's being created in this film. So I think it is really impressive, and I think Simon's right. We have to credit people behind that design and that part of the filmmaking.
Got a good cast in terms of the voice acting as well. Some people who are very recognizable. Ewan McGregor as the cricket is instantly recognizable. Tilda Swinton is the Blue Fairy. David Bradley does a great job as Geppetto. But there are like unrecognizable people, like Kate Blanchett. I didn't even know was in the film until the credits, because I would have never guessed what character she's playing. I don't want to spoil it.
Oh, okay. Don't spoil it then, because I didn't know either. And I didn't know that was Tilda Swinton, but that's interesting. No, I totally recognized a few, of course, and also they've, I suppose, like big shoes to fill again. This thing that redoing stuff that's been done, and then Disney redoes it in and of itself. I think sometimes people say that the original Pinocchio, which by the way is probably the film that scared me the most when I was younger, is one of the best, was written up as one of the best animations ever, made for years or something like that.
The Disney Pinocchio.
Yeah, the original 1940 is one of the ones where people will say is one of the better animations, ever made. It's frightened me to death. Actually,
there's really scary bits with the big whale in particular stands out in my memory from that original one.
I was gonna say when the kids turn into the donkeys, I think that was.
Oh yeah, and it's all done with shadows on the wall. Yeah,
very, very scary. This one I was expecting to be dark, and it was like almost what you were said. There was, there's obviously the darkness in terms of the political background and whatnot, but there was many moments of tenderness and redemption and and really sweet moments as well. So I got into the film a lot, in terms of the story, and I think it was very different and new for me, to see it in this way.
Yeah, you don't expect the rise of fascism to be the dark points in a Pinocchio film, but there we are.
Well, that is Pinocchio, and it is on Netflix right now, and you can check it out if you have it. So the second film we're reviewing is currently on Movie. It's on Movie UK, and I think all over. It was on Movie US when I checked it out here, and it's Park Chan-wook's Decision to Leave. Steph, please tell us about this film.
Thanks, Amanda. Yeah, this is Park Chan-wook's latest film, Decision to Leave. A lot of people will recognize Park Chan-wook's films such as Old Boy, more recently The Handmaiden, and other films such as I'm a Cyborg from the mid-2000s. This film kind of follows insomniac detective Yang Hae-jin, played by Park Hae-il, who follows aloof widow Song Soo-rae, played by Tang Wei. The story begins when Song Soo-rae's husband falls off a mountain. While it appears to be an accident, Song Soo-rae's unaffected attitude really draws attention to the detective, who begins a sleuth operation to find out if she had any involvement in his death. What kind of begins as a cat and mouse style noir kind of drifts into a doomed love story between the pursuer and the pursued. Don't want to give too much away there, because I think that it's quite a complex film that's really kind of is worth kind of diving into almost without knowing too much about it. It's quite a layered experience. I think this film is really worth going to see. I think it's a really well created kind of layered story. There's nothing really kind of nothing is really what it seems to be, in that kind of noir fashion. I think that Park Chan-wook has kind of made the relationship aspect the focus of this film, and I think from his kind of filmography, a lot of people might be expecting more kind of violence and action here, but I think romance is a genre that he does very well, which we've seen from films like I'm a Cyborg in the past. And there's a real flair that he adds to these stories, and a kind of deep poetry that he imbues into his writing and directing that complements this kind of bending, shifting narrative that kind of forebodes the tragedy in the end. Um, but I was a big fan of this. I don't know what other people thought about his latest film.
Yeah, I think it's a really clever, taut mystery film. It's more Hitchcockian than Chan Wook's previous work, because I think there's more focus on character and relationships. You know, it put me in mind of Vertigo, in the man kind of pursuing this aloof, mysterious woman kind of mystery. And yeah, I think there's more focus on character. There's a lot of lovely character details that really build up these, particularly the two central characters, but the whole kind of supporting cast feel well-rounded and feel very real. So it's very much works as a character study by focusing on the people and kind of putting those people under a magnifying glass. You know, you get to know the detective and why he's a detective, why he does the things he does, what drives him, what keeps him tied to his wife, what is drawing him to this mysterious woman. You feel all that through very slight character interactions and very slight character traits that just come through the narrative, through the dialogue, through the cinematography. I thought it all worked together really well, and some strong performances as well that really tie everything together.
Yeah, I agree with you both completely. It's definitely my favorite film of this month. I'll say one of my favorite films that I've seen in the year. I mean, I've have to go through this. I'm not putting my list together, like, but I think this really was a film that, I think you mentioned layers. There's so many layers to this that I'll want to go back to again and see it, and not because it's confusing, but because there's so much there, and I think that's, and you know, we were talking about noir and Nightmare Alley and stuff like that, but this is like a take on noir in a new way that I haven't seen in a while, that I just thought was really, really interesting. I thought I think Simon, you mentioned in terms of how, you know, cinematography, I think that's one of the more stunning films I've seen in a while. It's quite beautiful, but it's also in parts very funny, and sort of amusing, and I think it's through a lot of the performance and the focus of, you know, of the kind of the main cop character as well, just kind of going through, you know, his emotions and decisions and stuff like that. Really, really took me by surprise how much I liked the film, and I'll need to investigate it more as well.
I think with this film, what's so good about it is the main kind of characters in this film. You know, with them, like nothing's really black and white, and I think it does lend itself to those kind of Hitchcockian archetypes without really falling into them comfortably. I think the whole kind of noir aspect does always kind of set that up, and I do think that that is utilized to a certain extent. But I think with Park Chan-wook, he really makes these conventions his own, especially in this film. You can kind of see the kind of characters' complexities kind of made up of those kind of contradictions that seem that are there on the surface almost. You can see that Son So-rae is always questioning kind of, am I that wicked? And it's kind of unclear if she already kind of knows the answer to that. She sees all the actions that she does in this kind of virtuous light. You can see that she kind of traces that back to her first kind of act of violence, which is done through love, without forgetting that everything after that's kind of fulfilling her own kind of desires and meeting her own ends. But again, you have this kind of detective character that is kind of implied to be really ethically driven, and then you have this kind of where it kind of blurs the line where his kind of sleuthing for the purpose of investigation kind of becomes voyeurism for his own interests in a way. So there's not really but and again with both those characters, you kind of ask, kind of rings in your ears the whole film. Is it really all that simple though? Because there's different things that kind of make you question really what everyone's intentions are, because nothing really is crystal clear. And I agree with Amanda though, there are a lot of funny moments in this which I think really elevate the film more and give it more of those layers. I kind of love the kind of rom-com nods almost to Sansa Ray's character with the melon ice cream and like stuff like that, and stuff with the funniest, but I think was the chase, the cop chase, with Jan Hee-jun and his partner chasing after chasing after this person, and they all kind of collapse after having to go up so many stairs. And I think all these kind of small comedic moments, you could blink and miss them in a way, but I think they're quite effective in distancing those characters from these kind of archetypes that are kind of preset as well.
Yeah, it kind of wants to set up these kind of detective and femme fatale archetypes, but then it very cleverly deconstructs them by getting into who these people really are, who these characters really are, and takes them away from, the archetype of the moral perfect detective and really complicates that in an interesting way. I think it's very innovative as well, like you say, Amanda, in terms of cinematography and framing. There's some terrific shots and terrific scenes that sort of play with timelines and play with the idea of flashbacks and what character is in what position at what time. That's really interesting. I think the problem for the film, and this is entirely personal, is that Mubi have been doing a Park Chan-wook season. So I've watched a lot of Park Chan-wook films before this, and I think this is somewhat less complex than some of his other films, somewhat more straightforward. And I watched The Handmaiden basically right before this, and The Handmaiden is just terrific, like a brilliant piece of filmmaking. I don't think this quite gets up to that level, but I don't want to disparage it. It is a very good piece of filmmaking.
What I thought was also kind of cool about this film, and I think that I quite like, obviously, when you think about noir films, you kind of go back into like 50s, 60s cinema for quite a lot of it. And I think that I quite like the attention to detail in the sense that it kind of touches really cleverly on the digital age. There's a lot of kind of focus on people using smartphones a lot of the film, and kind of how, there's very much that thing, that those connotations with noir cinema, that's all about, deceit and like the hidden parts of people. And it's kind of a great juxtaposition in the sense that everyone's digital footprint is now the new fingerprint. So the kind of notion of that element of privacy in today's world is sort of non-existent, and that's like one of the kind of key drives that kind of influence the climax in a way. So I thought that was quite clever to kind of bring kind of noir film into kind of modernity and stuff. I quite liked that twist.
Yeah, I mean, and exactly, like kind of this new idea of neo noir or something, in the modern era, that, again, when sometimes you're hearkening back to like Del Toro's idea of noir would be like very much going back in time, and this is definitely a modern era. I also thought it was really interesting because I heard a Q&A where there is a song that is in the film a couple times, and it's quite important, and it's a song that in Korea many people would know of. It was very famous, and that was literally the inspiration for the film, and it was in part something around this idea of having a detective film, because of what it's called, or I think it's called The Mist or Fog or something like that. And then the story is of the lyrics are very romantic. So he mixed those two genres together. And I just thought, just somebody who has kind of the ability to come up with such a fascinating tale by just a simple sort of inspiration of a song like that. And this is what he came up with. It's fascinating.
Yeah. I think like Steph said, it's a very modern mystery. I think the use of technology, like you say, the use of mobile phones, for example, as kind of pivotal in putting together the narrative and the mystery, really works very well. he kind of recognizes the anxiety that you can get from a text conversation and portrays that on screen in a really interesting way. And it made me think of, there's a texting scene in Olivia Sayers' Personal Shopper that's super tense. And this has another texting scene that is just as tense, that really worked well for representing that kind of how we use technology today and how it forges or doesn't forge those kinds of relationships between us.
So true. Because I always often think how can text be sort of, shown on screen in the same way that like it can be so misread, and this is kind of a textbook of how to if directors are looking for said. Yeah, so Decision to Leave is on Mubi right now. I think we all agree it's worth the look, and maybe a second look as well. So check it out. All right, so the third film we're reviewing is Nanny. And Simon, tell us about this film.
Nanny is now streaming on Amazon Prime Video. It is the directorial debut of Nikyata Juzu, and it follows a Senegalese immigrant living in New York City named Aisha, played by Anna Diop. She gets a job working as a nanny for a white family in Manhattan. So she's spending a lot of time going to and from her apartment and this place where she's looking after this young white girl. She's also communicating with her son back in Senegal and raising enough money to bring him over to America, so they can kind of live the American dream together. But as the story moves forward, as she gets more involved with this white family, red flags start to appear, cracks start to appear in the relationship, and she begins to experience kind of visions of a presence, visions and hallucinations that suggest that all is not right with her world, with her relationships. So it's kind of an effective thriller horror. I guess you'd call it a modern horror film, following the kind of African experience, the immigrant experience of this young woman in America.
Yeah, I really like this film. I think that in the last decade or so, kind of there's been a lot of filmmakers exploring kind of the horror genre, and it keeps getting more inventive and creative, I think, which is great to see. And I don't think we'll ever arrive at a time where the genre is on a level playing field in award season, but I don't really think that matters. I think that for a lot of people that might have seen His House on Netflix, this film kind of reminded me of that a little bit. I think there's a few thematic similarities. I think there is kind of a way that the horror as a genre can be really powerful at kind of capturing these stories about traumas associated with themes like migration and kind of adjustment, and the way that kind of leftover feelings of guilt can kind of manifest into very kind of internal spiritual hauntings. I think, and I really like. I think it's really interesting about this film that it's not really invested in kind of creating any jump scares. There's not like faces coming out the walls. Which I think is kind of a triumph in many ways, because it's introspective and it manages to show how these kind of small microaggressions in life and these small manipulations can kind of can really have kind of a big impact on kind of fracturing like a sense of identity for people and a sense of belonging. And I think it works well because it's like Decision to Leave. It's kind of a character study with horror elements around it. We're kind of watching this character who is already displaced, like she's in a different country on her own, and the things that she needs to kind of break through those barriers around her, aren't being provided, and she doesn't kind of have any sense of stability. She's caring for a child that isn't hers, and while being like unable to see her own, and she's kind of being under this constant exploitation of this family that she's equally dependent on and can't really leave behind at the moment. So I think that when we see her kind of have these experiences, when she's experiencing kind of floods in her room, being pulled underwater by some sort of creature, there is this kind of distinct rationality behind that in a strange way, you know, with what she's going through. And I think the performance from Anna Diop really kind of brought these complexities to life as well. I think her performance was really fantastic in this film.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I guess I'm not a horror fan or so I do not have much knowledge about horror films. So don't really know how to comment on it compared to other films. And also maybe that kind of got me a little nervous about watching it just because that's just not my genre. But I didn't find it that scary. And I think I also thought that it was a psychological thriller as much and sort of had a great connection to it in terms of its setting being New York and sort of like you said, these microaggressions that are so like part of living in a city, but also, you know, people coming in and migrating and coming into a new sort of established way of the way that like a city like that works and sort of what you're forced to do, you know, when you're making it in a city like that. It works really, really well. So if you had said psychological thriller, I probably would have been more likely to have watched it, but I'm glad I did. And I think it was a great film. I was really impressed by the film entirely, and enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, I think you mentioned microaggressions, Steph, and I think what the film does really well is show those microaggressions of a young Black woman in a predominantly white community, predominantly white environment, shows those microaggressions really well, and in a lot of ways more subtly gets across those red flags than say Barbarian, the horror film Barbarian, or even Get Out. It's more subtle in representing her discomfort and how the white woman, for example, is oblivious to it and doesn't acknowledge or ignores that discomfort. You know, we see the man of the white family. He makes his living photographing. He's capturing the pain of Black people, but keeping a distance through his lens. And it's obvious that she's uncomfortable with those photos, but it's never stated outright. It's just left to you to figure it out, to see it through her expressions. But the white family never see it. They never acknowledge that.
I also like the way that this film kind of digs at the American dream, because I think it's really interesting how it does it, because there are obviously, you know, many louder moments that kind of meander through Aisha's turbulent journey among, you know, the human rights violations that are quite clearly attached to that. I like the way that the kind of the removal of the kind of rose tinted glasses also kind of falls on this perceived wealthy family that have this optimum kind of vision of privilege and wealth, and the mum Amy seems to kind of overcompensate and kind of relate every detail of how great her life is, unbelievably so. It becomes almost like a show, rather than the reality, because as the film develops, you see the kind of cracks there in her marriage, in her working life, and then this relationship with her daughter that's hanging by a thread. But in a way, kind of her own sense of this privilege makes her unable to really relate or empathize with Aisha at all, despite her own kind of perceived notions of the societal unfairness that's against her as well, that she can't move past. And I kind of found that interesting as well. It's kind of this these kind of layers again, where these kind of layers again of people of this kind of family that's meant to represent this dream as such, that's falling apart for them as well, in a way. But they kind of see themselves as much more outside of that failing vision than someone like Aisha, who's kind of migrated over, and it's much more obvious for her where the hurdles remain, rather than kind of like that kind of thing of not being able to see kind of internal in their own kind of space. I don't know. I just found it really interesting contrast there. I don't know if it was just me.
Yeah, I think it is very much responding to this, you know, the false sort of idealism of the American dream. I think it's very, very New York specific as well, where I think you have kind of a class structure that happens like within blocks, or so and sort of this idea of commuting in and out of certain areas and stuff like that. It's very, very particular to that city, and just because there's massive wealth differences in people who live there, and I think it actually really speaks to what it is to live in New York as well, as much as like you said about the American dream. I think it really does it well, and I would catch something. Sometimes I feel like if it wasn't authentically sort of speaking to that experience, but it is like spot on in terms of sort of dialogue and just sort of like scenarios and whatnot. So I think it's incredibly astute.
Gets a lot across about the different communities that can live side by side in a big city like New York as well, because you've got he's working for this white family, but they're entirely separated from the community of Black and African immigrants who she also plugs into and interacts with, but they feel entirely different. There's a kind of genuine sense of relief in the dialogue and in the character when she's around other Black people, whether they're African or they're Black Americans. You can feel the relief. You can feel her being more relaxed. That all comes through in the performance, which is terrific. You can just feel her being more relaxed than the tension that we always feel around the white family and other white people. You've mentioned Remy Weeks' His House. I thought there was a strong affinity with that as well, but it also reminded me of, there's an episode of Atlanta in the latest season, not the latest season actually, the third season, where there's a white family who get a Black African nanny, and the white parents become worried that the nanny is making the kid too Black. I thought there were elements of that in kind of how concerned the white woman is with her kid eating spicy food. She's concerned about the kid eating the right kinds of food and assimilating too much with that kind of Black experience that isn't the perfect white experience of the kind of America portrayed there.
I think the only thing that I kind of didn't like about the film, and this is more of a personal thing, I think, with me, is I think it was just the scene where Aisha's kind of in the wealthy people's apartment on her own with their child, and she's kind of experiencing a really kind of aggressive trance-like hallucinatory experience, and then she kind of comes to and she's holding a knife and there's suddenly blood everywhere, and it looks like there was almost an implied attack on the person's child. And I think that as someone that quite likes horror films and has kind of seen them throughout the years, it'd be difficult not to know that it's kind of got quite a problematic history with its representation of and I know this film isn't distinctly speaking about mental illness, but there's obviously connotations there. And I think that, we don't want to descend into the kind of tropes from the 60s of the kind of mad women apartment era. I think that there's relevance in those films artistically, but it's not something that I think we want to necessarily resurrect when we're talking about modern horror. I think it's quite a small detail. It's not it's not something that's stark. But I think for me, it felt almost out of place, message wise.
Yeah, the only really element of the film that didn't work for me is a kind of lack of cohesion between the film's different elements. I think the kind of background horror that the character that Aisha is experiencing doesn't really cohere with the kind of discomfort with the white family. And this is kind of a long-term, over the entire course of the film. I don't think they come together at the end particularly well. And I really like like we've talked about, I've really liked the microaggression, the discomfort, but I don't think it coheres particularly well with the horror and what ultimately turns out to be the reason for that horror.
Yeah. I would agree with that, and also just sort of thought that scene was a bit confusing, like in general. But maybe that was just me. Again, not very well versed in horror films whatsoever. I avoid just for my own sensitivity. But yes, so Nanny is currently on Amazon Prime, and I think overall, we think you should check it out. Okay, and our final film, we're on for December. We are going back to Netflix for Troll, which was directed by Roar Uthag, and I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly. And a Norwegian filmmaker, also really well-known Norwegian filmmaker that I've not seen any of his stuff before. But this Troll is done quite well on Netflix, and I'm not sure whether or not on, in the cinemas as well. But largely the story is, as one would expect, around a giant troll. But it's around a father and a daughter. As a young girl, there's Nora and her father kind of tells her a little bit about folklore in terms of trolls who live in the mountains, and knows a lot about that. And then we fast forward to the modern day, where Nora is now a paleontologist, and some disturbances have started to happen in the Dovra Mountains, and turns out that it is a troll. And so they go back to talk to Tobias, who is Nora's father, who seems to have become kind of a hermit, and is very affected by this mythology, which doesn't sort of have any scientific sort of backing, as well as Nora's part of a larger group of people, including Prime Minister's assistant and the military. So how are they going to solve this troll who's been woken up and is causing a lot of havoc on Norway, and is about to head into Oslo. So this is what was like a Godzilla meets it's like a Godzilla film with a troll. How else would you guys describe it?
Yeah, I think it's entirely derivative as a kind of monster film, but tied into Norwegian mythology, Norwegian folklore. And I think that's fine, as long as you know going in that this is a by the numbers monster movie. I'm a bit of a sucker for a monster movie. I like a big kaiju. I like a Godzilla. I like a Cloverfield monster. So I was just entirely suckered in by this, and really enjoyed it. I think while Netflix have the money, they should just give that money to every country, so every country can make their own monster movie where monster trashes their capital city. I'd be happy to watch all of those.
I would say I was really impressed, maybe like you said, the budget, but I thought that looked better than the Marvel movie you guys had me watch a couple months ago, so I was really impressed by just the effect of the troll. I believed that the scary troll was coming upon, so if I had seen it in a big cinema, I'd probably be even more impressed. But yeah.
This film, I kind of had, to be honest, quite low expectations going in. But to be honest, I actually did find it quite entertaining. It's not a film that takes itself seriously, really. This is recycled cinema. I don't think we were really ever under the illusion that it was anything else like that. And I think this is the intention of the film going in. It kind of thrives on this bizarre overuse of cliches that kind of make up this kind of blockbuster feature. But with Troll, we're more in B movie territory, which I think is okay. And I think the tropes of they're quite humorous. There's this kind of tongue-in-cheek feel in how these moments come out. We have this age-old classic bit of the old wise man who everyone thinks is crazy, but he's actually just very wise, and then predictably dies while giving one more note of wisdom behind. And these kind of quotes sound like I think they're pretty much they're pretty much the same as what Jeff Goldblum kind of says in Jurassic Park, but they're kind of the words are changed around, so it's definitely not that, you know. But then and then we've got this kind of hacker character who kind of saves the day in a very small amount of time, by hacking into a government missile code or something, which is done through a laptop in less than 5 minutes. And then you've got, obviously, of course, the kind of unhinged official who kind of just ends up wanting to blow up Oslo anyway, even though there's kind of a better action plan in place. And then that's so. But I think, you know what, that's kind of why, to me, B movies are great. They're not trying to kind of open up any new dialogues. They're built off on Moses-centric narratives, and they kind of amplify the absurdity along the way. So I think if you're looking for a complex, mind-bending like thriller, you're going to be disappointed. But if you kind of take this kind of film for what it is, you know, you at worst you'll be prepared for it not necessarily being your cup of tea. But I do agree with the special effects. I think they were done really well overall. I think the troll creature thing looked pretty impressive, and I think that had that obvious like towering quality that seemed to kind of blend in really well with the kind of background design. It wasn't kind of one of those awkward things that you see in a lot of kind of BC movies where it's quite clearly been shot in a completely different place and then just put in, and it looks really awkward, and I think it's done really well. The one thing I didn't care for is I don't really understand why the folklore element was really put in the film. It wasn't really mentioned enough or explored enough to be all that relevant. I think we could have had this kind of film for what it was without even mentioning much about folklore. I think it had to be revisited more to be all that relevant.
Maybe it needed more, because I would have been more interested in it if it was more and I'm not even that into, you know, Lord of the Rings kind of stuff, but I would definitely have been more interested to learn more about it, just because it would have been something different than, you know, like a Jurassic Park Godzilla film. So maybe we needed it a bit more. I liked the concept that, you know, the man who was seen as crazy because he lived in the woods, you know, like knew better than, you know, than the other, but it could have been explored perhaps a little bit more.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I really liked the folklore elements. I felt they added a lot to what was otherwise, you know, like we said, a thin derivative monster film. I liked taking the folklore seriously, but I could have done with more of it. So I liked the fact that, you know, the troll can smell the blood of an Englishman, smell the blood of a Christian rather, and taking that seriously is kind of fun, you know. And it can't stand the sound of church bells, you know. That's an old folklore element that they use for kind of a big set piece. I like that. I thought that was good. You know, trolls can't be out in direct sunlight. Well, it turns out it was out in cloud whenever we saw it in sunlight. Okay, sure, fine. But you know, I kind of like that, taking it seriously and building interesting bits around that. But yeah, it's like Steph says, whenever a character is introduced, you can write exactly what's going to happen to them. You know exactly what's going to happen because you've seen this kind of film before. So as long as you know that going in, I think it's fine, perfectly serviceable.
And I think, if I could be correct, I'm not giving anything away. It does seem like the end did suggest there might be a Troll 2 coming your way.
I think, yeah, they've got plans for sequels. Yeah, it says on Wikipedia they've got plans to make a sequel, maybe 2, depending on how they do.
I don't imagine it'll be like the last Troll 2 movie from the 90s. I think we've stepped up probably more budgetary wise there. But yeah, I think that what just kind of I didn't really get from the film was it kind of built up to be mostly about folklore, which is what I was most excited about. And it was kind of dropped more and more as the film kind of went on. And I thought that, I kind of was expecting the film to kind of be around all this folklore, and it kind of took kind of more of a backseat and became more of a derivative monster flick. I think that if it kind of went down that route, that's where it kind of could have stood out and set itself apart from kind of same kind of Godzilla-esque movies that we see all the time.
Yeah, I need to watch Troll Hunter again, which is a kind of Norwegian found footage film about trolls emerging. I haven't seen it in a long time, but I think takes a more serious, more folkloric look at troll monsters. But like I say, I need to watch that again.
And you can watch Troll, not to be confused with Trolls, on Netflix right now. Look it up if you want to have a Norwegian version of a monster flick this Christmas season. So yes, we went through 4 films. Currently, you can watch on various streaming of things if that's what. And also, we there's plenty of Christmas films you can check out and let us know what you think. What is your cinema plans? There's also going to be some big films I think coming out in the next couple weeks. In the cinemas as well. So are you guys looking forward to something during the Christmas season that's really you're excited to see?
I think while I've kind of got the break to recharge, I'm gonna take in sort of what I've missed this year. I think this has just been a year that I've not had much time to see a lot, and I know there's been a lot of great stuff that's come out just with transitioning jobs and stuff. Like there's been other pressures, but I think that I want to take the most of the time off to really kind of catch up on what's out. I think especially with platforms like Mubi, they keep you up to date and they kind of fill you in. So I think that browsing catalogs like that is going to be definitely a good way to bring in the holidays.
Yeah, I was going to say the same. I'm just feel like I'm going to be playing catch up with movies I didn't catch first time around. So just in the past week, I've watched The Northman, the Robert Eggers film, and didn't think much of that. It's fine that I missed it. And Barbarian, the horror film, which I didn't catch in cinemas, but is now on Disney Plus, and I really enjoyed that one.
I haven't seen Barbarian, but I saw The Northman and agree that was not my favorite film.
So disappointed. Yeah.
Yes, and yeah, I agree with you. Mubi is something I've had for a couple months. For a couple of years, and I just never get around to watching everything that's available on that. For me, I have not seen, I don't think, any television in the last year. I've been so busy, and as any films that I see, I often see for the show, and so I'm always prioritizing films. So, but there's some TV shows. You've mentioned a couple even on this show that I've not yet seen. Everyone's talking about White Lotus, not seen it.
Yeah.
So I think if anybody has any recommendations of TV that I've missed in the last 4 years, that might be something I'm doing.
I think the more people that bring this up on the show, and I haven't seen it, I've seen little bits of it and I've liked what I've seen of that, but I really want to take on Atlanta. I think that's something that seems to be really hyped up, so I'm going to jump on that train. I think that's going to be one of my next binge series.
Yeah, I'll say Atlanta. I'll always shout out Atlanta. It is so good. I think it's genuinely one of the best things on TV at the moment. It's just so inventive. It does a disservice to it to say it's the new Twin Peaks, but it's got a kind of weird vibe like Twin Peaks, but it is entirely its own thing. Yeah, I need to catch White Lotus because I haven't caught that. And on Guillermo del Toro, I wanted to watch Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities on Netflix because that's kind of short films by prominent directors. And I've caught a few of them. They've been pretty good, but I hear the really good ones are later in the season, so I need to catch up on that.
Great. And those all sound like the kind of week that I will be having, binge watching TV that I've missed. And I also really miss, to be honest, I'm in the States, I miss really bad commercials, and with like American commercials are like really funny, and also it's a weird thing to be back watching commercials. But so I wish you all a wonderful TV and film filled Christmas season, and hopefully relaxing, getting a break from what was a very intense year, I think. And I know it was for me, and I know it was in our cultural landscape here in Scotland. And hopefully next year will bring much better things.
Yeah, hopefully. Happy Christmas to everyone, happy holidays. Hope everyone has a good that break between Christmas and New Year. Just fill it with films and TV.
Yeah, I hope everyone gets a good time to actually have a proper break. I know that's not a luxury that everyone gets to have at this time of year. But I hope everyone kind of makes space and time for themselves, because I think it has just been too much of a heavy year to kind of keep going on the gas. Like, take a break, definitely, if you can.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you can go to the cinema as well, because it's great to see these films in the cinema and support your local cinemas as much as you can. So I'm wishing everybody a very merry, happy holidays and happy new year, and we'll see you in the new year.